The Willowbrook Estates HOA newsletter always led with the same tagline: community, courtesy, and care. 16 pages of glossy passive aggression printed on recycled paper, delivered every month to the 112 households in our Bazian brick suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. I used to laugh at it. Then I stopped laughing. Then I started keeping every single issue in a filing cabinet in my home office. Because sometimes the paper trail is the only thing standing between justice and a very expensive legal settlement. My name is Dana Whitfield. I'm 41 years old, a physical therapist by training, a single mother by circumstance, and a woman who has learned through fire that the people who smile the widest in a HOA meeting are sometimes the ones you need to watch the most. My daughter, Lily, is 9. She has spina bifida, a condition she was born with, a condition we have managed together with more grace than I sometimes thought either of us could muster. Lily uses a lightweight manual wheelchair. She is sharp, funny, obsessed with marine biology, and has the laugh of someone twice her age. She is, without exaggeration, the best thing in my world. We moved to Willowbrook Estates 3 years ago. The neighborhood seemed ideal. Quiet streets, good schools, and critically, a newly renovated elementary school 2 blocks away with what the realtor called excellent accessibility features. I walked the school grounds before I signed anything. I checked the ramps, the door widths, the bathroom stalls. I am not a woman who takes other people's word for things. The ramp at the school's main entrance was wide, gently graded, and fitted with smooth concrete. I remember standing at the top of it with Lily and thinking, okay, we can make this work. The problems started as they often do, not with a crisis, but with a comment. Our HOA president at the time was a woman named Beverly Marsh, not the fictional one, though I sometimes wished it were. The real Beverly Marsh was 63 years old, retired from a career in hospital administration, and possessed of the particular energy of someone who had once had institutional power and deeply missed it. She had silver hair she kept in a rigid helmet of curls, reading glasses on a beaded chain, and a voice calibrated to carry across large rooms without seeming like it was trying. She ran the HOA with the precision of a military operation and the warmth of a DMV. I had my first real conversation with Beverly at the September block party. 3 weeks after we moved in, she approached me while I was pushing Lily toward the dessert table, smiled in the way that people do when they want something, and said, "You know, we've been meaning to discuss the sidewalk modifications. The county permit for the curb cut in front of your property. Did you file the secondary variance form?" I had. I told her I had. She nodded as if I'd said something mildly suspicious and moved on. I filed it away. Over the following months, Beverly found reasons to engage with me at nearly every HOA function. Were my trash cans visible from the street? No, but she'd driven past at an angle. Was the grab bar installation on my front porch up to the HOA's aesthetic guidelines? I'd specifically chosen brushed nickel. Was I aware that the parking space I'd designated as accessible was technically within the sightline easement? It was not. I had a surveyor's report that said so. The pattern became clear. Beverly Marsh had decided that Lily's disability-related accommodations were a visual disruption to Willowbrook Estates, and she intended to chip away at them one citation at a time. I started attending every HOA meeting. I brought a notepad and I took meticulous notes. I introduced myself to the other board members. Tom Greer, a retired contractor who seemed genuinely embarrassed by Beverly's behavior. Karen Lutz, a real estate agent who voted with Beverly on everything. And Paul DeMarco, a soft-spoken accountant who abstained from contentious votes and then apologized to me in the parking lot afterward. The board was Beverly's instrument. She knew it. I knew it. The difference was that I was learning the bylaws. By February of Lily's second year at Willowbrook Elementary, I had read the HOA governing documents 3 times, the County Accessibility Code twice, and the Americans with Disabilities Act's Title II provisions more times than I could count. I had also met my attorney, a woman named Rhonda Castillo, who specialized in disability rights, and who had, when I described Beverly's behavior, said simply, "Document everything. She'll make a mistake eventually." I didn't know then how catastrophic that mistake would be. I didn't know it would involve my daughter, a ramp, and a Tuesday morning in March that I will never stop seeing when I close my eyes. It was a Tuesday, the kind of mid-March morning that Ohio specializes in, cold enough for a jacket, bright enough to be deceiving. Lily had a marine biology presentation due in her 3rd grade class, a poster she'd worked on for 2 weeks about the mimic octopus. She was nervous and excited in equal measure, bouncing her hands on her armrests the way she does when her emotions can't find any other outlet. I'd brought her to school 15 minutes early so she could set up before the other kids arrived. The school's main entrance ramp was, as always, our route in. It was a long ramp with a slight curve at the top, about 40 feet of concrete that descended from the main door level down to the sidewalk. There was a railing on each side bolted into the concrete. I always kept one hand on Lily's chair as we descended, angling slightly to control the speed. It was second nature. I had done it hundreds of times. I was talking to Lily about the mimic. Octopuscia was explaining how it can imitate a lionfish by spreading its arms. When I heard Beverly Marsh's voice behind me, "Dana, I need a word with you about the accessible parking petition you submitted," I turned my head without stopping. Beverly was standing at the top of the ramp, already reaching toward Lily's chair. I didn't understand what she was doing at first. My brain wouldn't process it fast enough. Beverly's hand closed around the back handle of Lily's wheelchair. She said, "Let me help you. Can look at this form while I—" And she pushed. She pushed the chair forward and stepped back. She didn't hold on. She simply applied force and released, the way you might give a shopping cart a shove in a parking lot. For one suspended second, Lily's chair rolled freely, and then the grade of the ramp caught it. And then it was moving, accelerating, and I was running. I was running down the ramp screaming my daughter's name and reaching for the chair that was already beyond my reach. The chair hit the slight rise at the bottom of the ramp, where the concrete met the sidewalk seam, and tipped forward. Lily's body pitched with it. She didn't go over the front, not completely, but the sudden jolt threw her sideways and the chair went onto its side on the sidewalk. Lily's left arm was trapped under the armrest. She hit the concrete with her shoulder, her cheek, and her forearm. I heard her cry out. It was the kind of cry that bypasses your rational mind entirely and goes straight to the oldest, most animal part of you. I was at her side before the chair stopped rocking. I did not move her. My training screamed at me not to move her, and I was already calling 911 before I had fully registered what I was saying. Around me the world continued. A car passed on the street. A bird moved in a tree. Children somewhere in the building were unaware that a 9-year-old girl was lying on the sidewalk in front of their school with her cheek on cold concrete. Beverly stood at the top of the ramp. She did not come down. She said, "From that distance, she's fine. I'm sure she's fine. It was just a little," and I told her, in language I will not reproduce here, to stop talking. The ambulance arrived in 6 minutes. The paramedics were gentle and competent and called Lily sweetheart, which normally she would have objected to but which she accepted in silence because she was frightened and in pain. Her left arm had a fracture, a buccal fracture of the distal radius, the kind that sounds catastrophic but is relatively common in fall injuries. Her cheek had a significant abrasion. Her left shoulder was bruised but not broken. For someone who had just been launched down a concrete ramp in a wheelchair, she was, by the most technical definition, lucky. I held her hand in the ambulance, and did not cry until she fell asleep under sedation for the imaging. And then I cried in a hospital hallway for 3 minutes, and then I stopped and I called Rhonda Castillo, Beverly Marsh. I would later learn, when inside the school after the ambulance left, she attended a previously scheduled meeting with the principal about the spring landscaping plan for the school's front beds. She did not call me. She did not go to the hospital. She sent, that evening, a text message to the HOA group thread, not to me personally, that said, "Prayers for the Whitfield family. Accidents happen to all of us." I screenshot it. I screenshot everything. Rhonda Castillo was at the hospital by noon. She sat across from me in the family waiting area, with a yellow legal pad and a cup of vending machine coffee, and she'll let me talk for 15 minutes without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Okay, tell me exactly what you saw her hands do." I described Beverly's grip on the chair, the push, the release. Rhonda wrote it down. She asked if there were witnesses. I didn't know. It had happened fast, and I'd been focused on Lily, but the school's entrance had cameras. I knew this because Beverly herself had pushed for their installation after a vandalism incident 2 years prior. The first thing Rhonda did after leaving the hospital was call the school principal to request that the footage be preserved. There was footage. The camera above the main entrance had captured the entire sequence with painful clarity. Beverly's approach, her hand on the chair, the push, the chair moving, my run. The school's IT coordinator burned it to a USB drive under the principal's supervision, and it went directly into Rhonda's possession. When she called to tell me, her voice was measured and professional. But I had worked with enough clinicians to recognize controlled emotion. "Dana," she said, "the footage is unambiguous." The police report was filed the day of the incident by the responding officers. They had taken Beverly's statement at the school. She had described it as an attempt to help that went wrong, an accident, a misread of the situation. The officers noted her account. They also noted the camera footage. Within 48 hours, the Columbus Police Department had opened a formal investigation. Rhonda had also filed a complaint with the Ohio Civil Rights Commission, citing Beverly's documented pattern of targeting Lily's disability accommodations as context for what might otherwise appear to be a single isolated incident. The HOA did not cover itself in glory in the days that followed. Tom Greer called me personally to express what sounded like genuine distress, and to say he had no idea Beverly was going to do anything like this. Karen Lutz sent a card, a literal greeting card, the kind with a photograph of flowers on the front that said, "Thinking of you," and contained no acknowledgement of what Beverly had done. Paul DeMarco said nothing at all. Beverly herself issued a statement through the HOA's email list that described the incident as a miscommunication during an attempt to assist a neighbor, and announced she would be stepping back temporarily from her HOA duties to allow the community to heal. The entitlement of it, the sheer structural arrogance of framing herself as a victim of the situation she had caused, was almost impressive. Lily came home from the hospital with a fiberglass cast on her left arm in a shade of blue she'd chosen herself, ocean blue, she said, for the mimic octopus, and a raw scrape on her cheek. This was already starting to crust over and heal the way children's skin mercifully does. She was quiet for the first day in a way that worried me. Lily is not a quiet child. On the second day she asked me if Beverly was going to be in trouble. I told her that Beverly had done something very wrong and that the people whose job it was to handle that were doing it. Lily was quiet for a moment and then she said, "She pushed me like I wasn't a person." I didn't trust myself to speak for a few seconds. Then I said, "You are absolutely a person, and what she did was wrong, and we are going to make sure that's very, very clear." Lily looked at her cast and said, "Good. Can we watch the octopus documentary again?" We watched it twice. The school district moved quickly, and with what appeared to be genuine alarm. The principal had already removed Beverly's visitor credentials pending the investigation. The district's ADA compliance officer conducted a full accessibility audit of the school entrance within a week, which resulted in new safety protocols for the ramp, including a requirement that no adult other than the child's parent or a school staff member may handle a student's mobility equipment on school property. It was a specific rule written, in effect, because of Beverly. Livy found this starkly satisfying. I found it insufficient but necessary. Rhonda filed a civil suit 6 weeks after the incident. The defendants were Beverly Marsh individually and the Willowbrook Estates HOA as a body, on the theory that the HOA had created the conditions for Beverly's escalating conduct by failing to act on my prior complaints about her targeting of Lily's accommodations. The suit cited assault, negligence, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The number in the complaint was not small. Beverly's homeowner's insurance retained a defense attorney. The HOA's insurer did the same. The next phase had begun. My neighbors, the ones who weren't board members, the regular people on the street, reacted in ways that surprised me. The family next door brought dinner 3 nights in a row without being asked. A woman 2 streets over, whom I had spoken to maybe 4 times, knocked on my door to tell me she had witnessed Beverly citing me for the grab bar issue a year earlier and was willing to give a statement. 3 other Willowbrook residents contacted Rhonda's office independently to describe their own experiences with Beverly's selective enforcement. The word pattern kept coming up. Rhonda's file grew thick. The criminal case resolved first. Beverly Marsh was charged with misdemeanor assault and reckless endangerment of a minor. She entered a plea of no contest, not an admission of guilt. Her attorney was careful to note, but not a contest of the facts either. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation, mandatory community service, and a behavioral intervention program. She was also permanently barred by the terms of her probation from serving in any homeowners association leadership role for 5 years. The judge, a compact woman in her 50s who had listened to the footage description with an expression of barely contained fury, said during sentencing that Beverly's conduct displayed a contempt for the bodily autonomy and dignity of a disabled child that this court finds deeply troubling. I was in the gallery. I kept my face still. I had practiced keeping my face still. Beverly did not look at me when she left the courtroom. She looked at the floor, then at her attorney, then at some middle distance that contained nothing. Her silver hair was still perfect. Her reading glasses were still on their beaded chain. She looked, in that moment, like exactly what she was. A woman who had believed for a very long time that the rules were for other people, confronting the specific weight of being wrong about that. The civil case settled 8 months after the incident, before it reached trial. I cannot disclose the full terms, but I can say that the settlement included a substantial monetary component that went into a trust for Lily's future medical and educational needs, a formal acknowledgement from the HOA board of their failure to respond adequately to my prior complaints about Beverly's conduct, a comprehensive overhaul of the HOA compliance procedures, supervised by an independent accessibility consultant, and Beverly's permanent resignation from all HOA activities. The HOA also paid for a professional accessibility audit of every common area in Willowbrook Estates, the curb cuts, the sidewalk grades, the ramp to the community mailbox that had been subtly wrong for years. All of it was corrected. Tom Greer called me the day the settlement was signed. He said, "I'm sorry I didn't do more when you were raising the alarm. It was a real apology, the kind that doesn't ask anything of you in return." I told him I appreciated it. Karen Lutz sent another card. I did not open it. Paul DeMarco resigned from the board quietly in November, citing personal reasons. A new board was elected in the spring, 3 new members, including a woman named Patricia Osei, who had a son with cerebral palsy and who had been watching everything unfold from 2 streets over with the focused attention of someone taking notes for a test she hadn't known was coming. Patricia became HOA president in April. The newsletter still leads with a tagline, but it means something different now, or at least it's working on it. Lily's arm healed completely. The cast came off 7 weeks after the incident, and she spent the following Saturday afternoon at the school's end-of-year science fair, where she won second place with a revised and expanded version of the mimic octopus presentation. First place went to a project on volcanic rock formation. Lily considered this an injustice, but accepted it with what she called scientific dignity. Her cheek healed without a scar. I am grateful for that in a way I find difficult to articulate, not because a scar would have defined her or diminished her, but because she had been given one thing she didn't have to carry forward. I still live in Willowbrook Estates. Several people asked me, in the months after the incident, whether I was going to move. I understood the question. It came from kindness, mostly a sense that the neighborhood had been the site of a trauma, and that departure might mean escape. But I didn't want escape. I wanted what had happened to mean something in the place where it happened. I wanted Lily to grow up in the house she knows, on the streets she knows, and to watch the accessible parking space in front of our driveway and know that it is there and it is right and it is not going anywhere. I wanted Beverly Marsh to know, every time she drove past our house on the way to wherever she was going, that we were still here. My attorney Rhonda has since used our case as a foundation for a training seminar she gives to HOA boards around Central Ohio. It covers ADA compliance, the legal exposure created by selective enforcement, and what she calls the cost of contempt, the specific financial and legal consequences that follow when an HOA enables a person who treats disability as an aesthetic inconvenience rather than a civil rights matter. She asked me once if I wanted to speak at one of the sessions. I said yes. I have done it twice. I bring Lily's ocean blue cast, which we kept. I set it on the table in front of me before I start talking. Nobody in those rooms has ever looked away from it. Beverly Marsh completed her community service hours at a food bank downtown. I know this because Columbus is not a very large city and people talk. I know she didn't look anyone in the eye for the first few weeks, and that by the end, she was, apparently, showing up on time and doing the work without complaint. I don't know what to do with that information. I don't know what it costs a person to build the kind of contempt she had built, or what it costs them to have it taken away. I know what it cost my daughter. I know what it costs me. Still, when I close my eyes and hear the sound of wheels on a ramp and start running before I'm fully awake. Some debts don't settle cleanly. You carry the balance, and you keep going. You keep going because there is a child in the next room who wants to tell you everything she knows about the mimic octopus. And the world she deserves to grow up in is the one you are still, every day, working to build.